There is another issue that's come up today that would certainly fulfil anybody's appetite for an interesting diary, and that's the Peter Slipper case back in the news today. The federal government has announced it's prepared to pay the former Speaker Peter Slipper's legal costs if he's left out of pocket by James Ashby's civil case. Mr Ashby, who worked in the former Speaker's office, tried to sue Mr Slipper after alleging sexual harassment. The federal court dismissed the case late last year after ruling it an abusive process, but Mr Ashby has appealed against that decision. Minister Gary Gray says the government's taken a strong view that politically motivated lawsuits could damage democracy.
In the context of this decision, there may be no payment made to Mr Slipper, his lawyers or others associated with his legal case, because they themselves are pursuing their costs from other lawyers and also from Mr Ashby, who took the original action, and maybe others too.
As of July the 1st, all federal MPs and senators were covered by liability insurance for net legal costs. Now, Nick Hayter, let me start with you here. Is there anything wrong with the government in this case covering?
Look, I haven't looked
costs?
at the details, but on the face of it, it seems to me to be a reasonable thing to do. I mean, directors, of course, of companies have, their legal indemnity, and it seems no reason why politicians shouldn't have indemnity. So, every argument seems to suggest this is reasonable. Yeah.
So, do you think that anybody is going to be game enough to raise an objection, Mark Colvin, to this?
Well, I would have thought, particularly because of the very strong judgment that Justice Rary's brought down, condemning in terms Ashby, Malbrough, Harman, the lawyers, that there's quite a strong argument to say that Peter Slipper ought to be able to have his say paid for. I imagine, because it is so very, very controversial, and there's been a lot of bomb throwing in this case, I imagine that somebody probably will object to it. But as Nick says, I think, and Louise, I think the precedent is there.
Well, it's nice to find ourselves in agreement here, Louise. The only, as Mark refers, there's a whole series of characters here on both sides. Do you think that
Is there a book in this?
Well, clearly there's a book in it, no question about that.
Not for me.
I was going to ask you whether either side really wants this matter back in the public domain, particularly.
I presume not. But I keep thinking, I understand politically motivated, vexatious suits. I understand the logic around protecting, MPs like we do, directors in corporate businesses. I understand that logic. I do have a hard time getting over the exchange of emails and text messages, and whether there's been any debate or discussion around the appropriate behaviour between professional colleagues in offices, whether they're in government offices or they're in workplaces of the sort we all work in. I just think they were wildly inappropriate from all sides, whether politically motivated, whether part of a sort of what is called a honeypot. When you honey trap. Honey trap. Honey trap. I don't know what it was, but I think wildly inappropriate. And I also think it brings me back to the great speech by the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard on misogyny, but I always wondered why she hadn't actually included Peter Slipper's vile remarks about female genitalia.
Because, of course, she was defending him when she made that speech. Exactly. That was the tricky thing, wasn't
problem.
it?
There is one...
In all cases, it goes back to this idea that has been well and truly blown to pieces in the last few weeks, that anything that we say online, in text messages, in emails, anywhere electronically, is actually private. One way or another, it's starting to look as though it's all going to come out, and whether it's going to come, whether it's being listened to by the Chinese or the CIA or the NSA or the British or that great big building that they've just put up at ASIO in Canberra.
There's an element also in this story, really the other end of the spectrum to what you're describing there. I don't know whether you followed this, Nick Hayter, but the citizen journalists who won't let the story of the James Ashby case go, who are providing their own money in small amounts, sort of a crowdsourced journalism project. This is a very interesting development.
It just feeds into my deep concerns about citizen journalists, as you say. I mean, look, it just seems a very, very strange way to behave. I mean, this man's brought before the courts, the judgment comes down. That, I thought, was it.
Well, look, there's another interesting character who's reappeared on the scene in the last couple of days. It's a controversial idea, but one of the independent MP, Bob Cash,